Chapter 21. Affirmation, Love, Acceptance, and Denial. Now, affirmation means saying quote-unquote yes to yourself and to the life you lead, and to accepting your own unique personhood. That affirmation means that you declare your individuality. Affirmation means that you embrace the life that is yours and flows through you. Your affirmation of yourself is one of your greatest strengths. You can at times quite properly deny certain portions of experience while still confirming your own vitality. You do not have to say yes to people, issues, or to events with which you are deeply disturbed. Affirmation does not mean a bland, wishy-washy acceptance of anything that comes your way, regardless of your feelings about it. Biologically, affirmation means health. You go along with your life, understanding that you form your experience, emphasizing your ability to do so. Affirmation does not mean sitting back and saying, "I can do nothing, it is all in fate's hands, therefore whatever happens, happens." Affirmation is based upon the realization that no other consciousness is the same as your own, that your abilities are uniquely yours and like no others. It is the acceptance of your individuality in flesh. Basically, it is a spiritual, psychic, and biological necessity, and represents your appreciation of your singular integrity. An atom can take care of itself, but atoms themselves are somewhat like domesticated animals. Joining in the biological family of the body, to some extent they become like friendly cats or dogs under your domain. Animals pick up the characteristics of their owners. Cells are highly influenced by your behavior and beliefs. If you affirm the rightness of your physical being, then you help the cells and organs in your body, and without knowing it, treat them kindly. If you do not trust your physical nature, you radiate this feeling also, regardless of what health procedures you may take. The cells and organs know that you do not trust them, even as animals do. In a way, you set up antibodies against yourself, simply because you do not confirm the rightness of your physical being as it exists in space and time. You can affirm your uniqueness quite properly at times by saying no. Individuality grants you the right of making decisions. In your terms, this means saying yes or no. By implication, to always acquiesce may very well mean that you are denying your own personhood. I hate. A person who says, "I hate," is at least stating that he has an I capable of hating. The one who says, "I have no right to hate," is not facing his own individuality. A man or woman who knows hate also understands the difference between that emotion and love. The ambiguities, the contrasts, the similarities, the affirmation of the creature self, allows for the free flow of emotion. Many disavow the experience of feelings they consider negative. They try to quote-unquote affirm what they think of as positive emotions. They do not permit themselves the dimensions of their creaturehood, and by pretending not to feel what they feel, they deny the integrity of their own experience. The emotions follow beliefs. They are natural, ever-changing states of feeling, each leading into another in a free flow of energy and activity, colorful, rich, glowing tints that bring variety to the quality of consciousness. Such states of personality can be compared to colors alone, bright and dark, the strong patterns of energy that always represent motion, life, and variety. To refuse them is futile. They are one of the means by which physically attuned consciousness knows itself. They are not destructive. One emotion is not good and another one evil. Emotions simply are. They are elements of the power of consciousness, filled with energy. They merge into a powerful sea of being when left alone. You cannot affirm one emotion and deny another without setting up barriers. You try to hide what you think of as negative feelings in the closet of your mind, as in the past they closeted insane relatives. All of this because you do not trust the aspects of your individuality in flesh. Affirmation means accepting your soul as it appears in your creaturehood. I said this earlier, but you cannot deny your creaturehood without denying your soul, and you cannot deny your soul without denying your creaturehood. Now, left alone, hate does not last. Often it is akin to love, for the hater is attracted to the object of his hatred by deep bonds. It can also be a method of communication, but it is never a steady, constant state, and will automatically change if not tampered with. If you believe that hate is wrong and evil, and then you find yourself hating someone, you may try to inhibit the emotion or turn it against yourself, raging against yourself rather than another. On the other hand, you may try to pretend the feeling out of existence, in which case you dam up that massive energy and cannot use it for other purposes. In its natural state, hatred has a powerful rousing characteristic that initiates change and action. Regardless of what you have been told, hatred does not initiate strong violence. As covered earlier in this book, the outbreak of violence is often the result of a built-in sense of powerlessness. Many who unexpectedly commit great crimes, sudden murders, even bringing about mass death, have a history of docility and conventional attitudes, and were considered models, in fact, of deportment. All natural aggressive elements were denied in their natures, and any evidence of momentary hatred was considered evil and wrong. As a result, such individuals find it difficult finally to express the most normal denial or to go against their given code of conventionality and respect. They cannot communicate as, say, even animals can, with their fellow men as far as the expression of a disagreement is concerned. Psychologically, only a massive explosion can free them. They feel so powerless that this adds to their difficulties, so they try to liberate themselves by showing great power in terms of violence. Some such individuals, model sons for example, who seldom even spoke back to their parents, were suddenly sent to war and given carte blanche to release all such feelings in combat, and I am referring particularly to the last two wars, not the Second World War. In these wars, aggressions could be released and codes still followed. The individuals were faced, however, with the horror of their violently released pent-up hatreds and aggressions. Seeing these bloody results, they became even more frightened, more awed by what they thought of as this terrible energy that sometimes seemed to drive them to kill. On their return home, the code of behavior changed back to one suited to civilian life, and they clamped down upon themselves again as hard as they could. Many would appear as super-conventional. The quote-unquote luxury of expressing emotion, even in exaggerated form, was suddenly denied them, and the sense of powerlessness grew by contrast. This is not to be a chapter devoted to war. However, there are a few points that I do want to make. It is a sense of powerlessness that also causes nations to initiate wars. This has little to do with their quote-unquote actual world situation or with the power that others might assign to them, but to an overall sense of powerlessness, even sometimes regardless of world dominance. In a way, I am sorry that this is not the place to discuss the Second World War, for it was also the result of a sense of powerlessness, which then erupted into a mass bloodbath on a grand scale. The same course was followed privately in the case of such individuals as just mentioned. Without going into any detail, I simply want to point out that in the United States, strong national efforts were made after World War II to divert the servicemen's energies into other areas on their return home. Many who entered that war feeling powerless were given advantages after it was over, incentives, education, benefits they did not have before it. They were given the means to power in their own eyes. They were also accepted home as heroes, and while many certainly were disillusioned, in the whole framework of the country's mood, the veterans were welcomed. I am speaking generally now about the war under discussion, for there were certainly exceptions, yet most of the men involved in it learned something from their experiences. They turned against the idea of violence, and each in his own way recognized the personal psychological ambiguities of their feelings during combat. They were told by politicians that it was to be the last war, and the irony is that most of those in uniform believed it. The lie did not become truth, but it became more nearly so, for despite their failures, the ex-servicemen managed to bring up children who would not go to war willingly, who would question its premise. In an odd way, this made it even more difficult for those who did go into the next two, less extensive wars, for the country was not behind either one. Any sense of powerlessness on the part of individual fighting men was given expression as before, this time in a more local bloodbath, but the code itself had become shaky. The release was not as accepted as it had been before, even within the ranks. By the last war in Vietnam, the country was as much against it as for it, and the men's feelings of powerlessness were reinforced after it was over. This is the reason for the incidence of violence on the part of returning servicemen. Hate, left alone then, does not erupt into violence. Hatred brings a sense of power and initiates communication and action. In your terms, it is the buildup of natural anger. In animals, say, it would lead to a face-to-face encounter of battle stances in which each creature's body language, motion, and ritual would serve to communicate a dangerous position. One animal or the other would simply back down. Growling or roaring might be involved. Power would be effectively shown, but symbolically. This type of animal encounter occurs infrequently, for the animals involved would have had to ignore or short-circuit many lesser preliminary anger or initiation encounters, each meant to make positions clear and to ward off violence. Another small point here. Christ's dictum to turn the other cheek was a psychologically crafty method of warding off violence, not of accepting it. Symbolically, it represented an animal showing its belly to an adversary. The remark was meant symbolically. On certain levels, it was the gesture of defeat that brought triumph and survival. It was not meant to be the cringing act of a martyr who said, "Hit me again," but represented a biologically pertinent statement, a communication of body language. It would cleverly remind the attacker of the quote-unquote old communicative postures of the sane animals. Now, love is also a great inciter to action and utilizes dynamos of energy. Love and hate are both based upon self-identification in your experience. You do not bother to love or hate persons you cannot identify with at all. They leave you relatively untouched. They do not elicit deep emotion. Hatred always involves a painful sense of separation from love, which may be idealized. A person you feel strongly against at any given time upsets you because he or she does not live up to your expectations. The higher your expectations, the greater any divergence from them seems. If you hate a parent, it is precisely because you expect such love. A person from whom you expect nothing will never earn your bitterness. In a strange manner, then, hatred is a means of returning to love, and left alone and expressed, it is meant to communicate a separation that exists in relation to what is expected. Love, therefore, can contain hate very nicely. Hatred can contain love and be driven by it, particularly by an idealized love. You quote-unquote hate something that separates you from a loved object. It is precisely because the object is loved that it is so disliked if expectations are not met. You may love a parent, and if the parent does not seem to return the love and denies your expectations, then you may quote-unquote hate the same parent because of the love that leads you to expect more. The hatred is meant to get your love back. It is supposed to lead to a communication from you, stating your feelings, clearing the air, so to speak, and bringing you closer to the love object. Hatred is not the denial of love, then, but an attempt to regain it, and a painful recognition of circumstances that separates you from it. If you understood the nature of love, you would be able to accept feelings of hatred. Affirmation can include the expression of such strong emotions. Dogmas or systems of thought that tell you to rise above your emotions can be misleading, even in your terms, somewhat dangerous. Such theories are based upon the concept that there is something innately disruptive, base, or wrong in man's emotional nature, while the soul is always depicted as being calm, quote-unquote perfect, passive, and unfeeling. Only the most lofty, blissful awareness is allowed. Yet the soul is above all a fountain of energy, creativity, and action that shows its characteristics in life precisely through the ever-changing emotions. Trusted, your feelings will lead you to psychological and spiritual states of mystic understanding, calm, and peacefulness. Followed, your emotions will lead you to deep understandings, but you cannot have a physical self without emotions any more than you can have a day without weather. In personal contact, you can be quite aware of an enduring love for another person and still recognize moments of hatred when separations of a kind exist that you resent because of the love you know is involved. In the same way, it is possible to love your fellow human beings on a grand scale, while at times hating them precisely because they so often seem to fall short of that love. When you rage against humanity, it is because you love it. To deny the existence of hate, then, is to deny love. It is not that those emotions are opposites. It is that they are different aspects and experienced differently. To some extent, you want to identify with those you feel deeply about. You do not love someone simply because you associate portions of yourself with another. You often do love another individual because such a person evokes within you glimpses of your own quote-unquote idealized self. The loved one draws your best from you. In his or her eyes, you see what you can be. In the other's love, you sense your potential. This does not mean that in a beloved person you react only to your own idealized self, for you are also able to see in the other the beloved's potential idealized self. This is a peculiar kind of vision shared by those involved, whether it be wife and husband or parent and child. This vision is quite able to perceive the differences between the practical and the ideal, so that in ascendant periods of love, the discrepancies in, say, actual behavior are overlooked and considered relatively unimportant. Love is, of course, always changing. There is no one permanent state of deep mutual attraction in which two people are forever involved. As an emotion, love is mobile and can change quite easily to anger or hatred and back again. Yet, in the fabric of experience, love can be predominant even while it is not static, and if so, then there is always a vision toward the ideal, and some annoyance because of the differences that naturally occur between the actualized and the vision. There are adults who quail when one of their children says, quote-unquote, "I hate you." Often children quickly learn not to be so honest. What the child is really saying is, "I love you so. Why are you so mean to me?" Or, "What stands between us and the love for you that I feel?" The child's antagonism is based upon a firm understanding of its love. Parents, taught to believe that hatred is wrong, do not know how to handle such a situation. Punishment simply adds to the child's problem. If a parent shows fear, then the child is effectively taught to be afraid of this anger and hatred before which the powerful parent shrinks. The young one is conditioned then to forget such instinctive understanding and to ignore the connections between hatred and love. Now, often you are taught not only to repress verbal expression of hate, but also told that hateful thoughts are as bad as hateful actions. You become conditioned so that you feel guilty when you even contemplate hating another. You try to hide such thoughts from yourself. You may succeed so well that you literally do not know what you are feeling on a conscious level. The emotions are there, but they are invisible to you because you are afraid to look. To that extent, you are divorced from your own reality and disconnected from your own feelings of love. These denied emotional states may be projected outward upon others, an enemy in war, a neighbor. Even if you find yourself hating the symbolic enemy, you will also be aware of a deep attraction. A bond of hate will unite you, but the bond was originally based upon love. In this case, however, you aggravate and exaggerate all those differences from the ideal and focus upon them predominantly. In any case, all of this is consciously available to you. It requires only an honest and determined attempt to become aware of your own feelings and beliefs. Even your hateful fantasies, left alone, will return you to a reconciliation and release love. A fantasy of beating a parent or a child, even to death, will, if followed through, lead to tears of love and understanding. Affirmation means acceptance of your own miraculous complexity. It means saying yes to your own being. It means acquiescing to your reality as a spirit in flesh. Within the framework of your own complexity, you have the right to say no to certain situations, to express your desires, to communicate your feelings. If you do so, then in the great flow and sweep of your eternal reality, there will be an overall current of love and creativity that carries you. Affirmation is the acceptance of yourself in your present as the person that you are. Within that acceptance, you may find qualities that you wish you did not have or habits that annoy you. You must not expect to be quote-unquote perfect. As mentioned earlier, your ideas of perfection mean a state of fulfillment beyond which there is no future growth, and no such state exists. Quote-unquote, love your neighbor as yourself. Turn this around and say, love yourself as you love your neighbor. For often you will recognize the goodness in another and ignore it in yourself. Some people believe there is a great merit and holy virtue in what they think of as humility. Therefore, to be proud of oneself seems a sin, and in that frame of reference, true affirmation of the self is impossible. Genuine self-pride is the loving recognition of your own integrity and value. True humility is based upon the affectionate regard for yourself, plus the recognition that you live in a universe in which all other beings also possess this undeniable individuality and self-worth. False humility tells you that you are nothing. It often hides a distorted, puffed-up, denied self-pride, because no man or woman can really accept a theory that denies personal self-worth. Fake humility can cause you to tear down the value of others, because if you accept no worth in yourself, you cannot see it in anyone else either. True self-pride allows you to perceive the integrity of your fellow human beings and permits you to help them use their strengths. Many people make a great show out of helping others, for example, encouraging them to lean upon them. They believe this to be a quite holy, virtuous enterprise. Instead, they are keeping other people from recognizing and using their own strengths and abilities. Regardless of what you have been told, there is no merit in self-sacrifice. For one thing, it is impossible. The self grows and develops. It cannot be annihilated. Usually, self-sacrifice means throwing the quote-unquote burden of yourself upon someone else and making it their responsibility. A mother who says to her child, "I gave up my life for you," is speaking nonsense. In basic terms, such a mother believes, no matter what she says, that she did not have much to give up, and the quote-unquote giving up gave her a life that she wanted. A child who says, "I gave up my life for my parents and devoted myself to their care," means, I was afraid to live my own life, and afraid to let them live theirs, and so in giving up my life, I gained the life I wanted. Love does not demand sacrifice. Those who fear to affirm their own being also fear to let others live for themselves. You do not help your children by keeping them chained to you, but you do not help your aged parents either by encouraging their sense of helplessness. The ordinary sense of communication given you through your creaturehood, if spontaneously and honestly followed, would solve many of your problems. Only repressed communication leads to violence. The natural force of love is everywhere within you, and the normal methods of communication are always meant to bring you in greater contact with your fellow creatures. Love yourselves, and you do yourselves just honor, and you will deal fairly with others. When you say no or deny, you also do so because in your mind and feelings, a present situation or a proposed one falls far short of some ideal, The refusal is always in response to something that is considered, at least, to be a greater good. If you do not have too rigid ideas of perfection, then ordinary denial serves a quite practical purpose. But never negate the present reality of yourself because you compare it to some idealized perfection. Perfection is not being, for all being is in a state of becoming. This does not mean that all being is in a state of becoming perfect, but in a state of becoming more itself. All other emotions are based on love, and in one way or another they all relate to it, and all are methods of returning to it and expanding its capacities. Now, throughout this book, I have purposely stayed away from the word love because of various interpretations often placed upon it, and because of the errors frequently committed in its name. You must first love yourself before you love another. By accepting yourself and joyfully being what you are, you fulfill your own abilities, and your simple presence can make others happy. You cannot hate yourself and love anyone else. It is impossible. You will instead project all the qualities you do not think you possess upon someone else, do them lip service, and hate the other individual for possessing them. Though you profess to love the other, you will try to undermine the very foundations of his or her being. When you love others, you grant them their innate freedom and do not cravenly insist that they always attend you. There are no divisions to love. There is no basic difference between the love of a child for a parent for a child, a wife for a husband, a brother for a sister. There are only various expressions and characteristics of love, and all love affirms. It can accept deviations from the ideal vision without condemning them. It does not compare the practical state of the beloved's being with the idealized perceived one that is potential. In this vision, the potential is seen as present, and the distance between the practical and the ideal forms no contradiction, since they coexist. Now, sometimes you may think that you hate mankind. You may consider people insane, the individual creatures with whom you share the planet. You may rail against what you think of as their stupid behavior, their bloodthirsty ways, and the inadequate and short-sighted methods that they use to solve their problems. All of this is based upon your idealized concept of what the race should be, your love for your fellow man, in other words. But your love can get lost if you concentrate upon those variations that are less than idyllic. When you think you hate the race most, you are actually caught in a dilemma of love. You are comparing the race to your loving idealized conception of it. In this case, however, you are losing sight of the actual people involved. You are putting love on such a plane that you divorce yourself from your real feelings and do not understand the loving emotions that are the basis for your discontent. Your affection has fallen short of itself in your experience because you have denied the impact of this emotion for fear that the beloved, in this case the race as a whole, will not measure up to it. Therefore, you concentrate upon the digressions from the ideal. If instead you allowed yourself to free the feeling of love that is actually behind your dissatisfaction, then it alone would allow you to see the loving characteristics in the race that now escape your observation to a large degree. Now, there is nothing more pompous than false humility. Many people who consider themselves truth seekers and spiritual are filled with it. They often use religious terms to express themselves. They will say, "I am nothing, but the Spirit of God moves through me, and if I do any good, it is because of God's Spirit and not my own." Or, "I have no ability of my own, only the power of God has any ability." Now, in those terms, you are the power of God manifested. You are not powerless. To the contrary, through your being, the power of God is strengthened, for you are a portion of what He is. You are not simply an insignificant, innocuous clump of lay through which He decides to show Himself. You are He manifesting as you. You are as legitimate as He is. If you are a part of God, then He is also a part of you, and in denying your own worth, you end up denying His as well. I do not like to use the term quote-unquote he, meaning God, since all that is the origin of not only all sexes, but of all realities, in some of which sex as you think of it does not exist. Affirmation is the spontaneous motion of the body as it dances. Many churchgoers who consider themselves quite religious do not understand the nature of love or affirmation as much as some bar patrons who celebrate the nature of their bodies and enjoy the spontaneous transcendence as they let themselves go with the motion of their beings. True religion is not repressive, as life itself is not. When Christ spoke, he did so in the context of his times, using the symbolism and vocabulary that made sense to a particular people in a particular period of history in your terms. He began with their beliefs, and using their references, tried to lead them into freer realms of understanding. With every translation, the Bible has changed its meaning, being interpreted in the language of the times. Christ spoke in terms of good and bad spirits because these represented the people's beliefs. In their terms, he showed them that quote-unquote bad spirits could be vanquished, but these were then symbols accepted as realities by the people, sometimes for quite quote-unquote normal diseases and human conditions. The very term, love your neighbor as yourself, was an ironic statement, for in that society no man loved his neighbor, but distrusted him heartily. Much of Christ's humor has been lost, therefore. In the Sermon on the Mount, the meek shall inherit the earth, has been grossly misinterpreted. Christ meant you form your own reality. Those who think thoughts of peace will find themselves safe from war and dissension. They will be untouched by it. They will escape and indeed inherit the earth. Thoughts of peace, particularly in the middle of chaos, take great energy. People who can ignore the physical evidence of wars and purposely think thoughts of peace will triumph. But in your terminology, the word quote-unquote meek has come to mean spineless, inadequate, lacking energy. In Christ's time, the phrase about the meek inheriting the earth implied the energetic use of affirmation, of love, and peace. As mentioned in Seth's Speak, the Christ entity was too great to be contained in any one man, or for that matter in any one time, so the man you think of as Christ was not crucified, nor was the idea of self-sacrifice then involved. The myth became more quote-unquote real than the physical event, which of course is the case in many so-called important historical events. But even the myth was distorted. God did not sacrifice his dearly beloved Son by allowing that Son to be physical. The Christ entity desired to be born in space and time, to straddle creaturehood in order to serve as a leader and to translate certain truths in physical terms. Each of you survived death. The man who was crucified knew this beyond all doubt, and he sacrificed nothing. The quote-unquote substitute was a personality seemingly deluded, but in his delusion he knew that each person is resurrected. He took it upon himself to become the symbol of this knowledge. The man called Christ was not crucified. In the overall drama, however, it made little difference what was fact in your terms and what was not, for the greater reality transcends facts and creates them. You have free will. You could interpret the drama as you wished. It was given to you. Its great creative power still exists, and you use it in your own way, even changing your own symbolism as your beliefs change. But the main idea is the affirmation that the physical being, the self that you know, is not annihilated with death. This comes through even in the distortions. The whole concept of God the Father, as given by Christ, was indeed a quote-unquote New Testament. The male image of God was used because of the sex orientation of the times, but beyond this, the Christ personality said, the kingdom of God is within you. In a certain way, the Christ personality was a manifestation of the evolution of consciousness, leading the race beyond the violent concepts of the times and altering behavior that had prevailed to that time. In terms of time, evolution as you think of it, emerging consciousness had come to the point where it delighted so in distinctions and differences that even in small geographical areas multitudinous groups, cults, and nationalities were assembled, each proudly asserting its own individuality and worth over the others. In the beginning, in those terms, man's emerging consciousness needed the freedom to disperse itself, to become different, to originate bases for various characteristics and assert individuations. By Christ's time, however, some principle of unity was necessary, by which this diversification would also experience a sense of unity and feel its oneness. Christ was the symbol of man's emerging consciousness, holding within himself the knowledge of man's potential. His message was meant to be carried beyond the times, but this interpretation is often not made. Christ uses parables that were applicable then. He used priests as symbols of authority. He turned water into wine, yet many who consider themselves quite holy ignore Christ at the wedding feast and think any alcoholic beverage degrading. He quote-unquote consorted with prostitutes and the poor, and his disciples were hardly men that could be called the city fathers. Yet many who consider themselves religious people hold on to respectability most of all. Christ used the vernacular of the times, and in his own way spoke out against dogmatic ideas, as well as temples that pretended to be repositories of holy knowledge, but were instead concerned with money and prestige. Yet many who consider themselves followers of Christ now turn against the outcasts that he himself considered brothers and sisters. He affirmed the reality of the individual over any organization, while still realizing that some system was necessary. His whole message was that the exterior world is the manifestation of the interior one, that the quote-unquote kingdom of God is made flesh. There are indeed 2 Gospels written by men in other countries in that time relating to Christ's unknown life, to episodes not given in the Bible. These formed a quite separate framework of knowledge that could be accepted by people who had different beliefs than the Jews at the time. The messages were given in other terms, but again, they reflected the affirmation of the self and its continued existence after physical death. Love was always stressed. One of the Gospels is a counterfeit. That is, it was written after the others, and the events twisted to make it appear that some of them happened in a completely different context than they did. Regardless, Christ's message was one of affirmation. At the time, Christ united man's consciousness in ways that reached out into history. The Christ consciousness was not isolated. I am speaking in your terms now. The same consciousness gave birth to all of your religions, therefore, the various frameworks through which the peoples of different times could express themselves and grow. In all cases, the religions began with the beliefs prevailing, spoke through the dictums of the times, and then expanded. Now, this represents the spiritual side of man's evolution. The idea frameworks of psychic and mental life were far more important than the physical aspects as the species grew and changed. Affirmation then means the loving acceptance of your own unique individuality. It may involve denial, where you refuse to accept the visions or dogmas of others in order to more clearly perceive and form your own. Such affirmation will lead you to your own inner discoveries and attract from the deepest portions of your being the particular kind of information, experience, and perception that you need. The loving acceptance of yourself will allow you to ride through beliefs as you would through the changing characteristics of a countryside. The more a belief encourages you to use your abilities and vitality, then the more affirmative it is. Rupert's perception is highly altered this evening, and this is an example of certain kinds of both affirmation and denial. He has always emphasized his own unique creative and intuitive processes. In so doing, he denied many of the concepts believed in by others. He accepted the belief that any consciousness could be in some kind of direct, intimate contact with experiences and realities usually not perceived, but ignored. He knew there were many different ways of experiencing even the physical world, and so he rejected all concepts that told him otherwise. The very belief allowed him to use those abilities, and as muscles become more resilient with use, so do psychic and intuitive powers. The legs run and leap over areas of ground. They cannot themselves interpret the reality beneath them. The feet are not aware of the ants they crush. They may feel the grass or sidewalk or the road, but the peculiar individual sensate life of the grass itself or of the ant escapes the feet, which are involved in their own reality and concerned with these other things only in their relationship to feethood. The mind can interpret the experiences that the legs and the feet have, however, and by imaginatively using the sensual data can perceive the ant's reality to some extent. Now, when the mind races and runs, it sometimes has great difficulty interpreting its activities to the brain, which is usually concerned with other realities only to the extent that they impinge upon it. Now, Rupert's mind is far more aware of other realities than his brain is, but he consciously believes in the greater reality of himself and his perceptions. The brain also possesses this belief, and so it opens itself as much as possible to the mind's activities. Because it does, certain intuitive, psychic, and quote-unquote intellectually spacious experiences can be physically felt to some extent. The knowledge is interpreted through alterations in body sensation, which give it an important corporeal validity. In such cases, high mental and psychic activity is reflected in the body's experience, providing a beneficial unity. Here I have used the term spacious for workings of the mind and intuitions that exist in what you might call an accelerated range of action. The normal intellect, oriented so precisely by beliefs to the inevitability of a one-focused kind of perception, is limited. A certain kind of affirmation of self allows the brain to tune into these more spacious methods of perception that are the natural characteristics of the mind. There are very good reasons why this type of assertion must first occur. The brain and the entire physical system is meant to ensure your bodily survival and to follow your conscious beliefs about reality. There is always a harmonious unifying connection between your beliefs and activities. Some people feel utterly confident in certain areas and are timorous in others. Some aspects of life may be ignored or even refuted for a time, while others are focused upon. The individual will very cleverly and shrewdly go ahead in those areas in which he or she feels safe, often when in the process of altering beliefs. You will not use your spacious mind until you affirm its reality within yourself, and until you are ready to handle the additional data, which will then become consciously available to one extent or another. But the spacious mind operates through your creaturehood. In your terms, it represents latent abilities of consciousness that can be more or less normal functions. There are built-in biological structures that are activated for the reception of such messages, and they have always been a part of your physical nature as a species. They will not be triggered on a personal basis until your own beliefs allow you to perceive the multidimensional layers of your own experience, or at least accept the possibilities. As Rupert's episode tonight shows, even normal sense data then achieves a kind of multidimensionality, a richness rather impossible to describe. This automatically provides a biological learning process in which the senses can be used in a freer, deeper fashion. While such occurrences are not constant, they are frequent enough so that ordinary experience is changed. The richness overlaps. You do not have to know anything about so-called psychic matters necessarily. Many individuals use the spacious mind and its perceptions, taking it for granted without realizing how different their own perception is from that of others. Rupert wondered about this next matter, which is related. Physiologically, you carry within yourselves remnants of your evolution in your terms, physical vestiges of organs and other attributes long discarded. In the same way, you also carry within you structures not yet fully used. Those organizations point, in your terms, toward future evolution. Use of the spacious mind involves these. Individuals through all the ages have experienced this kind of awareness, though never to its fullest form. Experience with the spacious mind dissolves any seeming conflicts that occur between the intellect and the intuitions at other levels. To whatever extent possible, the physical organism interprets that unity through a new mixture of sense data, so that materially the information makes sense. An individual can tune into spacious mind operation 2 or 3 times in a lifetime without realizing it, and have experiences that he finds difficult to interpret later. The affirmation involved is one of transcendence, in which for a time a person affirms his reality in flesh and at the same time states his independence from it, and realizes that both of these conditions exist simultaneously. A dual perception takes place, in which the spacious mind is activated. By activated, I mean that the physical organism is suddenly aware of the spacious mind's existence. Now, when utilized properly and fully in your terms of time, the spacious mind will vastly enrich the dimensions of the species, bringing the body into a greater harmony than now possible. On a neurological basis, there are unreleased, latent triggers that can be set off, and when they are, your practical experience with time as you know it will be altered. From your viewpoint, the species will then be so different that it will seem to be another one entirely. As Robert once suggested, your modern system of communications has already expanded the data available to a private conscious mind in a given amount of time, and this on a purely physical level. You have to handle and assimilate information now available as to happenings in other places that in previous centuries no ordinary individual would have been aware of. Events in distant places then become present knowledge. Time intervals between an episode and your knowledge of it are shortened, though the event may occur on the other side of the world. Jet travel scrambles your idea and experience of time, and in so doing alters your concepts of it. But within the mechanisms of the body, there are unused and unrecognized triggers that will allow you, as a species, to consciously handle greater perceptions of time, just as you now handle greater perceptions of space. In a very limited and fumbling manner, this is hinted at through the use of computers, where you try to assess quote-unquote future probabilities and act accordingly in your present. The mind can do this far better than any computer. If it believed this, then certain portions of the brain would be activated. The brain would become aware of more of the mind's knowledge, and the probabilities of future events would be made consciously available. Now, the brain would have to sort out this information so that the physically attuned mechanism was clearly able to maintain its temporal present. When man first developed the pause of reflection, as mentioned earlier in this book, he did undergo initial disorientation before he learned to distinguish a vividly remembered event of the past from a presently experienced one. The growing consciousness had to make such distinctions for practical behavior. To utilize future probable events, the physical brain would be forced to enlarge its function while keeping the individual in clear relationship with the present moment of power or corporeal effectiveness. Affirmation always involves the acknowledgement of your power in the present. In greater terms, denial is the surrendering of that power. Affirmation, then, is the acquiescence to your ability, as a spirit within flesh, to form the physical reality of your creaturehood. Now, you can alter your present through altering your past, or you can change your present from the future. Even these manipulations must take place in your practical experience present, however. Many people have, at one time or another, changed their present behavior in response to the advice of a quote-unquote future probable self, without ever knowing they have done so. Suppose you have a particular goal in mind as a youngster, toward which you work. Your intents, images, desires, and determination form a psychic force that is projected out ahead of you, so to speak. You send the reality of yourself from your present into what you think of as the future. Now, say that at a certain stage you have some decisions to make and do not know which way to turn. You may sense that you are in danger of swerving from your purpose, yet for other reasons feel strongly inclined to do so. In a dream or in daydreaming, you may suddenly hear a voice, mentally, that tells you in no uncertain terms to go ahead with your initial intent. Or in some other way, you may receive the same information through an urge or a vision, or simply by suddenly knowing what to do. This happens in your present. In other terms, the self that you have projected into the future is sending you back encouragement from a probable reality that you can still create. That focused self operates from its present, however, and someday in your own future, you may find yourself thinking nostalgically of a moment back in your own past when you were indecisive and irresolute, but took the proper course. You may think, I am glad I did that, or, knowing what I know now, how lucky I am that I made that decision. And in that moment, you are the future self that quote-unquote once spoke encouragingly to the person of the past. The probable future has caught up with the practical present. The early affirmation of yourself projected into the future made such an incident possible. In the same way, your acceptance of yourself and your own integrity can, at any moment in your present, alter your past and future. Chapter 22. Affirmation, the practical betterment of your life, and the new structuring of beliefs. If you have a loving regard for yourself, then you will trust in your own direction. You will accept your present position, whatever it is, as being a part of that direction, and realize that from it can come all the creative elements that you need. Being yourself and trusting in your own integrity, you will automatically help others. It does little good to repeat a suggestion such as, I am a worthy person, I trust myself and my integrity, if at the same time you are afraid of your own emotions and become upset whenever you catch yourself in what you think of as a negative frame of mind. As lovers can see the quote-unquote ideal in their beloved, and yet be well aware of certain inadequacies, certain deviations from that ideal, so can you, loving yourself, realize that what you think of as imperfections are instead gropings toward more complete becoming. You cannot love yourself and hate the emotions that flow through you at the same time, because while you are not your emotions, you identify with them so often that in hating them, you hate yourself. Use your conscious mind and its logic. If you discover that you feel unworthy, then do not simply try to apply a more positive belief over that one. Instead, discover the reasons for your first belief. If you have not already done so, write down your feelings about yourself. Be perfectly honest. What would you say if someone else came to you with the same reasons? Examine what you have written. Realize that a set of beliefs is involved. There is a difference between believing that you are unworthy and being unworthy in fact. Then, write a list of your abilities and accomplishments. These should include such issues as getting along well with others, being attractive, being good with plants or animals, being a good carpenter or cook. Any talent or achievement should be noted as honestly as you recorded the most minute quote-unquote defects earlier. There is no human being alive who does not have creative abilities in his or her own way, achievements and excellent characteristics. So if you follow these instructions, you will find out that you are indeed a worthy individual. When you catch yourself falling into a mood in which you feel inferior, look at your second list of abilities and accomplishments. Then use the positive suggestion in your own worth, backed up by your own personal self-examination. You may say, but I know I have great abilities that I am not using. When I compare myself to others, then I fall far short. What difference does it make if I have a few mundane achievements that are shared by many others, that are in no way unique? Surely my destiny involves more than that. I have yearnings that I cannot express. In the first place, you must understand that in your own uniqueness, it is futile to compare yourself with others, for in so doing, you try to emulate qualities that are theirs, and to that extent deny your own miraculous being and vision. Once you begin comparing yourself to others, there is no end to it. You will always find someone more talented than you are in some way, and so will continue to be dissatisfied. Instead, through working with your own beliefs, take it for granted that your life is important. Begin with it and where you are. Do not deride yourself because you have not reached some great ideal, but start to use those talents that you have to the best of your ability, knowing that in them lies your own individual fulfillment. Any help that you give to others will come through the creative utilization of your own characteristics and no one else's. Do not get upset with yourself when you find yourself dwelling on negative issues in your life. Instead, constructively ask yourself why you are doing so. The answer will come to you. Use the knowledge as a bridge. Let whatever emotions are involved happen. If you do this honestly, feelings of self-worthlessness or despondency will go through and vanish, changing of their own accord. You may even find yourself impatient with the feelings themselves, or even bored, and hence dismiss them. Do not tell yourself automatically that they are wrong, however, and try to apply a quote-unquote positive belief like a band-aid. Have a sense of humor about yourself. Not a malicious one, but a kindly, humorous regard for yourself. High seriousness is fine when it comes naturally and is not forced, but it can become pompous if it is prolonged. If you allow yourself to be more and more aware of your own beliefs, you can work with them. It is silly to try to fight what you think of as negative beliefs or to be frightened of them. They are not mysterious. You may find that many served good purposes at one time, and that they have simply been overemphasized. They may need to be restructured rather than denied. Some beliefs may work very positively for you for certain periods of your life. Because you have not examined them, however, you may carry them long after they have served their purpose, and now they may work against you. For example, many of the young believe at one time or another that their parents are omnipotent, a very handy belief that gives children a sense of security. Grown into adolescent years, the same offspring are then shocked to discover their parents to be quite human and fallible, and another conviction often takes over, a belief in the inadequacy and inferiority of the older generations, and in the rigidity and callousness of those who run the world. Many embarking upon young adulthood think that the older generations have done everything wrong. However, this belief frees them from childish concepts in which older persons were always not only right but infallible, and it gives them the challenge to tackle personal and world problems. For a while, the new adults often feel themselves to be invincible, beyond the boundaries of creaturehood even. This belief, again, endows them with the strength and energy they need to begin a life for themselves and to form their own mass world. Yet in material terms, they must all realize, sooner or later, not only the challenges, but the other peculiar characteristics of creaturehood, in which basically no such generalized beliefs make sense. If, at the age of 40, you still believe in the infallibility of your parents, then you hold that idea way beyond its advantageous state for you. Using the methods in this book, you should discover the reasons for this belief, for it will prevent you from exerting your own independence and making your own world. If you are 50 and are still convinced that the older generations are rigid, fast in the way of growing senile, mentally incompetent, and physically deteriorating, then you are holding an old belief in the ineffectiveness of the older generations and setting up negative suggestions for yourself. Conversely, if you are 50 and still believe that youth is the one glorious and effective part of a lifetime, you are of course doing the same thing. A young adult, gifted in a particular area, may hold a belief that this ability makes him or her superior to all others. This may be quite beneficial for the person involved at a given time, to provide the needed impetus for development and the necessary independence in which the ability can grow. The same person, years older, may find that the identical belief has been held too long, so that it denies very important emotional give and take with contemporaries, or becomes restrictive in other ways. A young mother may believe that her child is even more important than her husband, and according to the circumstances, this belief may help her pay the necessary attention to the child. But if the concept is held as the child grows older, then this can also become highly restrictive. A woman's entire adult life can be structured according to such an idea if she does not learn to examine the contents of her mind. A belief that has positive results for a woman of 20 will not necessarily have the same effect for a woman of 40 who, for example, may still pay far more attention to her children than her husband. Many of your beliefs are of course cultural, but you have still accepted those that serve your own purposes. As a rule, men in your society believe themselves logical, while women are considered intuitive. Women, now trying to assert their rights, often fall into the same trap, but backwards, trying to deny what they think of as inferior intuitive elements for what they think of as superior logical ones. Certain beliefs then will structure your lives, often for given periods. You will grow out of many of them. When you do, the inner structuring will change, but you must not cravenly acquiesce to quote-unquote leftover beliefs once you recognize them. I feel inferior because my mother hated me, or I feel unworthy because I was scrawny and small as a child. You may find as you work with your beliefs that a feeling of inferiority seems to stem from such episodes. It is up to you as an adult to get on top of your beliefs, to realize that a mother who hates her child is already in difficulties, and that such a hate says far more about the mother than it does about her offspring. It is up to you to understand that you are now a grown person and not a child to be bullied. The point of power is in the present. That point is not in the past unless you abjectly decide to acquiesce to worn-out beliefs that no longer serve you. If you believed you were unworthy because you were scrawny and bullied, then in some way you undoubtedly used that belief for your own purposes. Admit it. Discover what the purposes were. Perhaps you compensated, became athletic later, or used the impetus to go ahead in your own way. If your mother hated you, you may have used that to assert independence, to give you an excuse or a pathway, but in all cases you form your own reality, and so you agreed to it. Many people who write to me feel that they have unusual psychic or writing abilities, or sense an outstanding need to help others. They constantly compare what they do with what they think they are capable of, but often without making a start toward the development of their own abilities. They want to write great philosophical theories, for example, perhaps never putting the pen to the paper, or trusting themselves enough to begin. Some want to help the world at large, but all they do is think about this desire without trying to implement it in all its practical terms. The ideal in their minds becomes so great that they are always dissatisfied with their own performance, yet they are afraid to make a start. The loving acknowledgement of your own uniqueness would in itself show them how to begin to use their own abilities in their own way, and to trust their present situation. The ideal is not yet materialized. It is just the essence of a direction. But that direction can only be found by using what you have in the now that you know, and by acquiescing to your own opportunities and abilities, and using those through the power of the present. There is certainly nothing wrong in asking for help from others when you think that you need it, and sometimes much to be gained. There are those who make a practice of seeking aid from others, however, using this as a means of avoiding responsibility. In specific physical problems, help should be sought in areas in which you have little knowledge, but many people look to those outside themselves, psychics, doctors, psychiatrists, priests, ministers, friends, for the answers to overall life situations, and in so doing, they deny their own abilities of self-understanding and growth. Because of your educational framework, the individual is taught to be wary of the inner self, as mentioned earlier, so unfortunately, the ordinary man or woman looks for the solutions of personal problems outside of the self, where they can least be found. If you use the methods given in this book, you should know yourself far more intimately than you did before, and be better equipped to handle your personal reality. Simply knowing that you form your reality can free you from some limiting concepts that have held you back in the past. You can then examine your beliefs creatively, finding the correlations between them and your experience. The conscious knowledge alone will trigger intuitional responses within the inner self so that you will receive helpful information through dreams, impulses, and ordinary thought patterns. If you affirm the basic grace of your being, then this will automatically weaken the beliefs you have that are contrary to that principle. You will be able to hold equally within your experience the vision of an quote-unquote ideal self and all those natural deviations from it. You will begin where you are and joyfully start to expand those attributes that you have now, without expecting them to appear full-blown. You will love yourself and have no difficulty in loving your neighbor. That does not mean that you must be unaware of divergences from your ideal concept of the beloved. And again, it does not mean that you must smile constantly, but that you affirm your validity and grace within the dimensions of your creaturehood. As soon as you begin to compare what you are with some idealized concept of yourself, you automatically feel guilty. Until you work with your beliefs, this guilt can be initiated by the most harmless episodes and characteristics. It is a good idea to write down a list of specific acts or incidents that fill you with a sense of guilt. Often you will be able to trace them to early childhood beliefs quite easily, some instilled by a well-meaning parent to protect you, or out of an adult's ignorance. Brought into the open, however, many of these will dissolve before your comprehension. When you affirm your own rightness in the universe, then you cooperate with others easily and automatically as a part of your own nature. You, being yourself, help others be themselves. You are not jealous of talents you do not possess, and so you can open-heartedly encourage them in others. Because you recognize your own uniqueness, you will not need to dominate others nor cringe before them. You must begin to trust yourself sometime. I suggest you do it now. If you do not, then you will forever be looking to others to prove your own merit to you, and you will never be satisfied. You will always be asking others what to do, and at the same time resenting those from whom you seek such aid. It will seem to you that their experience is legitimate and yours counterfeit. You will feel shortchanged. You will find yourself exaggerating the negative aspects of your life and the positive sides of other people's experiences. You are a multidimensional personality. Trust the miracle of your own being. Make no divisions between the physical and the spiritual in your lifetimes, for the spiritual speaks with a physical voice, and the corporeal body is the creation of the spirit. Do not place the words of gurus, ministers, priests, scientists, psychologists, friends, or my words higher than the feelings of your own being. You can learn much from others, but the deepest knowledge must come from within yourself. Your own consciousness is embarked upon a reality that basically can be experienced by no other, that is unique and untranslatable, with its own meaning, following its own paths and becoming. You share an existence with others who are experiencing their own journeys in their own ways, and you have journeying in common then. Be kind to yourself and to your companions. I am also journeying. What information and knowledge I have, I try to give to you through Rupert and Joseph, who are parts of me in your space and time, but they are themselves as I am myself. Now, Rupert's own beliefs in the nature of his consciousness helped bring about these sessions. Rupert and Joseph have both worked with the nature of creativity, and from an early age, each of them sought for answers, but most of all, they trusted the destiny and grace of their beings. They might have felt that they had lost direction at times. For certain periods, they might have had problems in which they forgot their aims momentarily, and yet their beliefs in themselves, individually and together, were strong enough to give them their present reality. Many who write want to develop and use the same abilities, yet it is obvious from their letters that their beliefs prevent them from trusting the inner self enough. You cannot fear your own being and expect to travel through it to explore its dimensions. First, you must take the simple step of affirming your identity. That affirmation will release those attributes that you have and open up new avenues of experience. They will and must be your own. When you ask others to interpret your dreams, for example, you are automatically putting the fulfillment of your own potentials a step away. When you ask another to tell you the direction of your life, then to some extent you keep from yourself the realization that you yourself possess. Without that awareness, no methods will help you. Now, in ordinary terms, this book has included no esoteric instructions to help you achieve what you may think of as spiritual development or psychic expertise. Yet, it is a preliminary for all of those who want to use creaturehood as a framework through which to perceive and experience other realities. As I mentioned earlier, you will not become more spiritual by denying your flesh. This is the life you are living. Trust the living that flows through you. By doing so, other realities will make themselves known. They will add dimension and depth to your present reality. You make your own reality, wherever you travel and in whichever dimension you find yourself. Before you embark upon other journeys of consciousness, understand that your beliefs will follow you and form your experience there as they do here. If you believe in demons, you will meet them, in this life as enemies, and in other realms of consciousness as devils or quote-unquote evil spirits. If you are frightened of your emotions and believe them wrong, then when you try quote-unquote psychic experiments, you may believe that you are possessed. Your feelings, the repressed ones, will seem demonic. You will be afraid to assign them to yourself, and so will think that they belong to a disembodied spirit. It is very important that you understand the true innocence of all feelings, for each of them, if left alone and followed, will lead you back to the reality of love. Trust no person who tells you that you are evil or guilty by reason of your nature or your physical existence, or any such dogma. Trust no one who leads you away from the reality of yourself. Do not follow those who tell you that you must do penance in whatever form. Trust instead the spontaneity of your own being and the life that is your own. If you do not like where you are, then examine those beliefs that you have. Bring them out into the open. There is nothing within you to fear. My life is mine, and I form it. Tell yourself this often. Create your own life now, using your beliefs as an artist uses color. There is no condition that you cannot change, except one indisputably physically accepted at birth within the realms of creaturehood, such as a liability in terms of a missing organ or a functional lack. If you have been filled with self-pity because of a disease or a life situation, then seize the initiative. Face your beliefs honestly and find out the reason for the difficulty. I speak with the inner vitality that is inherent within each of my readers, with the inner knowledge that also belongs to them. I close by saying, as I have said before, you are given the gift of the gods. You create your reality according to your beliefs. Yours is the creative energy that makes your world. There are no limitations to the self except those that you believe in. I am Seth. I speak my name joyfully, though names are not important. Then each of you speak your names with affirmation every morning. You create your life through the inner power of your being, whose source is within you and yet beyond the selves that you know. Use those creative abilities with understanding abandon. Honor yourselves and move through the godliness of your being. End of book.